Hello and welcome to Tallahassee Tree Talks. I'm Daniel Siegel. In this podcast, I'm going to be talking to citizens of Tallahassee about knowledge, experiences, and stories that have to do with one of our city's most incredible characteristics. Trees play major roles in our lives, and we also play a major role in the lives of trees. Join me as I get to know more about people, trees, and their relationships in Tallahassee. This podcast is sponsored by a community engagement grant from the Sunshine State Biodiversity Group in Tallahassee, Florida, a nonprofit aimed at conservation, education, and community outreach on environmental issues facing the region. For more information, visit sunshinestatebiodiversitygroup.com. In this episode, get ready to hear about tree legislation, standing in front of a bulldozer, development profit margins, canopy roads, the power of petitions, and newspapers. When you search the internet for stories about trees in Tallahassee, there are two names that appear in most of the articles. One is Stan Rosenthal, a former county forester who has made a career out of managing the relationship between people and their arboreal neighbors. The other is Ann Bidlingmaier. Ann isn't a formally trained arboreal specialist like Stan. Her career was spent in education working as a high school English teacher. That she is so often mentioned in articles about trees in Tallahassee, though, comes as no surprise. Since 1981, Ann has been deeply involved in tree protection in this city.
My name's Ann Bidlingmaier. I'm founder of a group called Tree Watch.
Ann saw a problem with the way the city of Tallahassee was handling its trees.
I've been noticing for a long time that developers were clear-cutting lots and just clearing way too many trees, and I learned that there was basically no tree ordinance in Leon County or the city of Tallahassee. There was a canopy roads ordinance that protects canopy roads from 100 feet from the center line into the side, but that was the only tree regulation. And one day, the governor, it was Governor Graham's environmental advisor, was visiting, and I noticed that some trees next to my apartment were being bulldozed. And Graham's advisor said, "Well, just go out and ask him if he's got a permit and see what happens." So I stopped the bulldozer and I said, "Do you have a permit?" And he said, "I don't know nothing about no permit." And one thing led to another, and the press covered it very well. And the newspaper decided to run a column asking people if they were in favor of a tree ordinance or not. This was the response. All these items that people clipped out and sent in. So there's a big response. We got great press coverage. Here's some more tree ordinance things from the paper.
The folder of ballots Ann showed me was very full. It's clear that Tallahassee's citizens care deeply about their trees. With such a tremendous community of tree lovers and protectors, it's no surprise that Tree Watch achieved its primary goal. Media coverage helped Ann begin a citywide push for greater tree protections, something she appreciates regardless of her feelings about the title of the article, which refers to Ann and her supporters as tree vigilantes.
I thought it was a bit much, so we called ourselves Tree Watch instead of tree vigilantes.
Vigilante might be a strong word, but Tree Watch did come about as a result of Ann's spur-of-the-moment decision to literally stand down a bulldozer. So how does that sort of thing get started? Who was involved besides yourself?
I just went out and stopped a bulldozer, and the press took off with it. And this was my former boyfriend, an urban regional planner, chairman of the planning department, and he was very knowledgeable, so he helped. But basically, when we got all this press, people started calling me, and this was before the days of email and smartphones, and they just looked in the phone book for my name, which is pretty hard to miss, and hundreds of people called me. And they showed up at city commission meetings and to show their support, in county commission meetings, and that speaks very loudly when you have people show up at commission meetings in support of something.
So what was that like? Did you just, come across this bulldozer?
Yeah, it was next door to my apartment, and I just yelled out to our house guest. I said, what do I do now? And that's when Dan O'Connell, who used to work with the governor's office, said, well, just stop him and ask him if he has a permit. And I did, and the guy was nice enough. I mean, he said, well, I really hate to destroy this lot. So I guess things just went from one media event to the next media event, and it just took off. I mean, people really supported me too. I mean, I wasn't just one lone person doing it. It was the community.
This widespread support was possible in large part because of the Tree Vigilantes article.
So this was the original article here, and it got a lot of attention. And the newspaper has been a great ally in the past. Now, today, newspapers aren't what they used to be. But
the article, written by Janet Hinkle and Betsy Robertson, was published in the Tallahassee Democrat on April 19th, 1981, on the front page of the local section. Its title is Tree Vigilantes Battle Bulldozers. Miami has beaches, it says. Tampa has cigars. Tallahassee has trees. Trees are a defining characteristic of this city. The last update to tree ordinances in Tallahassee had been passed in 1973. It created penalties for anyone who uprooted or felled trees without county permission. As it turns out, the driver of the bulldozer Ann stopped was actually complying with the existing ordinance. Tallahassee's citizens decided that this wouldn't do. Tree Watch's efforts and campaigning were successful in creating new county and city tree ordinances, mostly because of public support following the extensive media coverage. So have you found that there's a big community of tree lovers and tree protectors in Tallahassee?
Over the years, yes, there has. And you can see I showed you the ballots of people who wanted to protect, trees and the tree ordinance we've got.
It's a very full folder of ballots.
Yeah. And so traditionally I haven't heard many people come out against conservation, but there are always those who just can't make a wise decision and are not informed.
The tree ordinance Ann and Tree Watch fought for was passed in 1984, and there's no doubt that Tallahassee's extensive canopy coverage owes something to this new framework of legal protections and protocols. Tallahassee prides itself on having been a Tree City USA since 1993. The requirements for this designation? A municipality must maintain a tree department or board, spend at least $2 per capita on urban forestry, and celebrate Arbor Day. Tallahassee fulfills these requirements.
So I put together a group and we wrote an ordinance for the county. And they passed it after they had a citizens group sort of water it down. And then the city decided it would jump on board. And it asked me to be on a committee to help write a tree ordinance. So we did, and we got it passed. And there was not really much opposition, but little by little, people in the city manager's office have wanted it diluted. So it's not the same ordinance that we had back when I wrote it. So people have been complaining about the fact that we need a new tree ordinance. I don't think we need to go that far. I think what we need to do is enforce the existing tree ordinance and see how it goes. And then if we need to rehab it or revise it, then we can. Right now in the city, we don't have the votes to get an improved tree ordinance. The city commission is divided 3-2 on just about everything, with the two progressive, environmentally leaning commissioners being outweighed by the three more conservative ones. So we're in a situation where we've come a long way, in terms of protecting trees, and then we're starting to regress.
Even though things have backslid, I was curious what it takes to get this kind of legislation passed.
Well, what we did for the county, we had a group of people meet at my house every Tuesday, and we just wrote up what we thought an ordinance should be, and then we submitted it to the county. They rewrote it and passed it, and then the city decided they wanted their own ordinance too. So they opened up a growth management office, and they appointed a committee to write an ordinance for the city, because the city and the county's ordinances are fairly similar, but there are differences between the two. The density in the city is greater. The county has more silviculture or tree farming, and it's less dense. So there's slightly different needs. But Tree Watch just go ahead and started this, and you can see the literature here for it.
Tree Watch didn't create new tree lovers in Tallahassee. Instead, it brought together a community that historically cared deeply about conservation and legally encoded what was already an integral part of the city, a tremendous amount of trees. So Tallahassee has quite the canopy coverage compared to a lot of cities.
They do.
What do you think makes this city so unique in that aspect?
Because of our canopy roads. We have 9 now, and I think there's one in the making. But we've got really great canopies. But we have developers from out of town, except for one in-town developer who they just don't appreciate trees. They've never had them. So when they look at a lot, they immediately just want to clear cut everything, which is what happened at Falls Chase and at a development called Canopy. I don't know why they have the name Canopy, because there's no canopy out there. And they just don't have an appreciation for the fact that trees soak up a lot of water. Roots are great sponges. And after this past storm, people are saying, oh, we shouldn't have such a tree cover, but we need it to breathe. We need it to prevent erosion. We need it to soak up rainwater. So we do have a lot of trees, but what we need to do is go forward with underground utilities, and that would save a lot of wear and tear on the telephone poles and on power outages, things like that.
Tallahassee's canopy roads are quite special. Protections for these roads were in place before Tree Watch's new tree ordinances, after all. Involvement on the Canopy Roads Citizens Committee is one of many ways in which Ann has built a name for herself as a prominent voice in the world of community conservation in Tallahassee. She isn't just a tree vigilante. Another Tallahassee Democrat article, this one written by Gerald Ensley in 2000, labels Ann Tallahassee's tree lady. And since then, I mean, when I was Googling things about trees in Tallahassee, your name was popping up everywhere. Could you tell me about some of the many different ways you're involved in tree protection?
Well, it's been years, but after the tree ordinance got passed, I started being appointed to different committees: the variance board, the environmental variance board. 6 years I was chair of the Canopy Roads Citizens Committee. And there were just a number of different boards that I got appointed to, and people would call and ask me questions about trees. And I'm not a botanist or a biologist, but I gradually, little by little, learned from other people how trees thrive, what they need to grow, what needs to be done to protect them. So over the years, I just learned by doing and made a lot of phone calls, and I'm a master gardener, and with the help of Stan Rosenthal, the extension forester, we would go out and make tree calls when people had questions about trees, about hazardous trees or sick trees. We would go out, and I just did it to follow Stan around because he's so knowledgeable. And I learned a lot about that, and I still get calls about trees, probably one every couple of weeks.
Maintaining a healthy relationship between people and trees, as we learned from Stan Rosenthal, is difficult. It's easy to say that any development harms trees, and this is true to a certain extent, but there are ways to build new structures while mitigating damage to trees. After all, there would be far less historic live oaks in Tallahassee if it weren't for our canopy roads and the protections afforded to the trees that shade them. Other historic developments seem to have valued the benefits of trees as well.
And there are the older neighborhoods seem to be a lot more desirable in terms of aesthetics. Los Robles, even this neighborhood, if you come in, the back way, you can see, how nice it is. And see older neighborhoods with room around the houses. But with the economy, developers are trying to pack as many units as they can into the developer for their profit margin.
Leaving some space for trees in a development was standard in the past. So what's changed? As Ann mentioned, more space for trees means less space to develop and therefore lower profits. The biggest change, though, is one Ann alluded to earlier. the protections in place for trees don't seem to be enforced as extensively as they once were. One such protection is the green space requirement.
Designating, a certain percentage of property to remain green. That was very helpful. I don't think it's enforced as much anymore, again, but there used to be a 40% green space requirement, and I think it's dropped. There have been changes in the urban forestry practices in the city, but I can't tell you exactly what they are.
And how good of a job do you think the city has done of preserving its trees and maintaining that balance?
It's declining. When I first started in this business back in the 80s, they seemed to be very anxious to uphold the ordinance and to do a good job. And I know that staff, most of whom have retired now, but the staff seem to be very diligent. And I think that the people in the trenches would like to be diligent, but I don't think that they're getting the support they need from their superiors.
While Ann sees a problem in the current state of affairs, it's by no means irreparable. What other sorts of changes do you think we should engage in to make life better for our trees?
Well, for one thing, we have to stop the clear cutting. And it used to be that a developer had to propose a site plan with the building design before he could remove any trees. That's kind of disappeared. Not by any official means, but just because the current city management seems to want to let developers do their thing without the proper oversight. So I think, first of all, we have to stop the clear cutting. We need to have a landscaping provision a little bit stronger than it is. We need to preserve buffers. On the development out Ox Bottom Road, there was a 35-foot buffer required, and for some reason, the city commission decided to lower it to 20 feet. Well, 20 feet is nothing. I mean, I don't think you could even hide a car in a 20-foot buffer. We need to protect our buffers. We need to make sure that the types of trees that are planted for landscaping are healthy, are good species, because some aren't, like water oaks and a certain kind of holly trees. I'm trying to remember the one that you don't see it much anymore. Or Bradford pears are not good trees. So I think we need to, with the help of arborists and landscape architects, have a tree species requirement to be replanted. But by and large, I think we need to protect trees at the beginning of a development and not let a developer come in and clear cut and then decide what he's going to build. That's what happened out at Ox Bottom. The developer went in and clear cut, and he doesn't even know yet what his design of the building is going to be. So that should come first, and then the tree removal should come second.
So what can, say, the average Tallahassee citizen do to try and help?
Vote. Get a new city commissioner. I think that's really important. And even in the county, take a look at what the platforms are and what the history is of the various candidates and vote according to how green they are.
The trees, Ann reminds me, were there first. If we want to cohabitate with them, it's our responsibility to design around them. Trees can't always decide where they grow, but we can decide where we build. A prominent example is the new Amazon Fulfillment Center.
It's finished, and it's operating, and it required the loss of a lot of trees. But my feeling is the same as the Master Gardener's slogan, and that is the right tree in the right place. And with Amazon, I would say it should be the right building in the right place. Well, that's not the right building for that piece of property. So I think that was a mistake building that. And the traffic is bad, and it's not aesthetically done. And being aesthetic doesn't mean that you have to lose your profit margin, but it just means thinking ahead and designing a building that's going to be in the right place at the right time.
So you've done a lot of work encouraging developers and public officials to do that sort of thinking ahead. How receptive have you found that they are?
I'd say it's about 50-50. Some developers, especially the ones from out of town, don't want to be told what to do. It's my land, I can do what I want to with it, is their philosophy. And some developers are very good. Mad Dog Design and Construction, for example, has tried to do the right thing. There are individual builders who take the time to survey the property and find out how many trees are there, what types they are. It's called doing a tree count. And developers are supposed to do a tree count first. They don't always do it. And that's why I say that the city needs to take it upon itself to enforce the existing ordinance, and then we'll go from there.
The onus of managing development isn't just on developers themselves. It's also a responsibility of city and local governments.
Well, the public officials drive the ordinance process. So some public officials were not in favor of a tree ordinance, but that was a long time ago. And right now, I don't think we've got the management in the city of Tallahassee who is going to promote conservation. It's just not there.
And why do you think that is? Has there been a changing of priorities?
Well, I think there may or may not be money changing hands, but money's always an issue. But a lot of developers have good friends in our officials. And out of friendship, and it's a social thing and a friendship thing. And some officials just don't want to offend their friends.
Thanks to Tree Watch, there is a good tree ordinance in place. Enforcement, rather than legislation, seems to be the problem.
Oh, Northwood Mall, which used to be Northwood Mall and is the site of the new police station, city officials told the neighbors that they would protect the trees out there. There are 20 live oaks, I think. And then overnight, the residents came out, the next morning, and the trees were all gone. And it was a sort of a bait and switch. I mean, they were told by city management that the trees would be looked at and considered, and they weren't. So I think the city management was just paying lip service to the concerned neighbors, and the trees are gone, and they didn't need to be removed at all.
This bait and switch echoes a similar event in Tallahassee's history of community tree activism, one that ended with the Florida Supreme Court ruling in favor of tree activists when the city commission removed trees on Calhoun Street. In this ruling, Justice Glenn Terrell stated, "The mere fact that a city is authorized to widen, lay out, and improve its streets does not authorize it to peremptorily invade and mutilate the property of its citizens." Strong words against the city commission. The story of development on Calhoun Street is interesting, but there's some important background before we can get back to Justice Terrell's harsh but deserved opinion. Tree protection in Tallahassee first took off in 1843, when a fire burned down almost all the buildings made of wood from Pensacola to Park Avenue between Adams and Monroe. The loss of so many trees pushed citizens to plant trees along the streets. This fire also led to Tallahassee's first tree ordinances, protecting trees from damage by wagons and horses. The city council also declared that only brick and stone could be used in construction downtown, not wood. This was largely to prevent such a fire from happening again, but it did also prevent the chopping down of local trees. There were several subsequent large planting projects in Tallahassee. In 1860, the city council planted 200 live oaks. In the 1890s, a woman named Jenny Tatum Davis, a founding member of the Tallahassee Improvement Association, planted oaks at the Capitol, which in her day was devoid of trees, that are still around today. Ann isn't the first Tallahassee tree lady. Along with Jenny Tatum Davis's oaks by the Capitol, Dr. Laura Jepson's oak, called the Litchgate oak, stands to this day. Jepson didn't plant this oak. It was over a century old when she purchased the property on which it stands. She did, though, register it with the Live Oak Society, an organization which allowed the registration of live oaks greater than 100 years old, each of which is given a sponsor who serves as an attorney for the tree. The dues for a registered oak at the time were 25 acorns per year. Ann's work in the 1980s not only continues this long history of tree protection in Tallahassee, it also harkens back to a similar movement in the 1930s and 40s. This history is described by Caroline Phillips O'Brien in the book The Live Oak Trail, published in 1999. O'Brien is the niece of Caroline, or Carrie Edwards Elliott, who she refers to as sister, and who could definitely be considered one of Tallahassee's original tree ladies. when a permit was issued for the removal of a tree near the Capitol to make room for a gas station on December 12, 1938, Carrie Elliott used the same strategies to save the trees that Ann did in the 80s, minus the standing in front of a bulldozer bit. She brought together advocates from a number of civic organizations to protest the permit. These organizations included the Women's and Junior Women's Clubs, the Garden Club, the Daughters of the American Revolution, Literary Club, Junior Chamber of Commerce and American Legion, the Kiwanis Club, the Tallahassee Capitals Baseball Club, and the business manager of the Florida State College for Women. The Tallahassee Garden Club, of which Carrie Elliott was a founding member of the Oleander Circle, and later a president, also held a meeting passing a resolution deploring and protesting the wanton and useless destruction of trees on the streets of Tallahassee. Those who arrived at the meeting organized by Elliott were encouraged to sign a pre-prepared telegram asking the purchaser of the land to save the tree by the Capitol. Ann's folder of ballots isn't the first signed written proof of community support for tree conservation in Tallahassee. The organizations I listed got together and spoke at a commission meeting on December 13th, and as with the work done by Tallahassee Tree Watch, newspapers spread the word far. They won their fight on December 16th of 1938. The commission revoked the permit to cut down the live oak and suggested the formation of a planning board to make zoning and beautification decisions. Just 10 days later came a proposal for a planting project which would grow 120 live oaks. The groups Elliott assembled decided to call themselves the Community Planning Council, a very similar organization to the later Tallahassee Tree Watch. A city ordinance was passed not long after the Community Planning Council got together, which required a majority vote of city commissioners before a tree could be cut. Decades later, a different group of concerned citizens, calling themselves Tallahassee Tree Watch, protesting a legal removal of trees, used media coverage to garner public support for stricter tree ordinances. And now we get to the event I hinted at earlier, which ended with a state Supreme Court justice upholding an injunction against the Tallahassee City Commission. In 1946, a plan to develop, widen, and commercialize Calhoun Street required the removal of 26 trees. The city commission had promised a man named Frank Shaw that if he bought a house on the corner of Calhoun and Call, they would open Calhoun for business. Commissioner Martin was strongly in support of the plan, while other commissioners voted to delay the development until they consulted with landscape engineer and city architect A.D. Taylor. The Taylor plan warns against removing trees on Calhoun Street. The city held a citizens' meeting, but the contract for tree removal had already been made before this meeting. The Community Planning Council filed an injunction in the name of Claire Bowen, owner of a house on Calhoun Street. The commission, without announcing that the matter would be discussed, voted to remove the trees and did so early the next morning. A sneaky tactic akin to the one Ann mentioned at Northwood Mall. Elliott, while not standing in front of any bulldozers, was certainly bold. She told Commissioner Martin, "George Martin, I wish you had to move to the Sahara Desert and live where you'd never again see a tree. Maybe you'd appreciate the trees we have here." The Florida Supreme Court upheld the injunction in October of 1946. Justice Glenn Terrell's opinion has some choice words for the city commission. He said that when a city attempts to turn a long-established area like that into a business district, requiring the demolition of streets and property fronts, I think there must be a public necessity shown for doing so, and provisions be made for restitution by those whose property is damaged. He didn't believe the city commission had proved such necessity. "I find nothing else to support the action of the correspondents in this case," he declared. "The city ordinance of Tallahassee also contemplates that the action complained of be taken with the advice and consent of the Park and Planning Board, but that requirement was also ignored." This theme seems to reoccur when it comes to Tallahassee's trees. An ordinance isn't effective unless it's enforced. Part of the enforcement problem comes with a decrease of dedicated tree professionals, both to ensure that trees are protected when they need to be and to make sure that trees are removed when necessary. Ann realizes that not all trees are beneficial. And have there been times where you felt that trees did need to be removed?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, any kind of hazardous tree or potential threat, and that's why it's a good idea to have an arborist, come around and survey trees. We had an arborist with the city of Tallahassee after Stan retired. She was a forester, and she took Stan's place. Stan worked for the county, which included the city, and she was supposed to be working with the city and the county, and she was unable to really do much, and she finally moved to St. Louis. So we don't have anybody in the city or the county like Stan, who was a forester and made house calls and could survey tree hazards. But yeah, there are times when you have to remove trees to make room for the building. Sometimes you can change the building footprint to accommodate trees. And that's why I say that we should look at the overall site plan and move the building to fit the trees, not move the trees to fit the building.
Development that avoids damaging trees isn't just a question of where you build. How you build is just as important.
And a lot of builders have heavy equipment parked on tree roots, and 2 runs by a heavy machine can kill a tree eventually. It takes years. There's been a lot of damage during construction of homes, and then 7 years later, the tree starts dying and nobody knows why. Well, it's because the contractors just ran right over tree roots and didn't put tree barricades around trees. And that's another thing that we had builders do, is put a tree barricade around tree roots so that they would keep machinery off of the roots.
Ann has seen some successes as she served on the Canopy Roads Citizens Committee. So one thing that I've been super curious about is the Canopy Roads Citizens Committee. Can you tell me what it's like to serve on that committee?
It was really rewarding. One of the biggest challenges we had was approving Blairstone Road, which turned out to be a great road, but at first there was a lot of opposition to it. And the Canopy Road Citizens Committee had to approve the design of Blairstone Road, and we kept sending it back to the engineer saying, you've got to think outside the box, come up with something better, you can do it, and they finally did. And it took 3 or 4 tries, but they finally submitted a plan for Blairstone that I think is an example of a successful road. So that's what we did. McClay School asked to build a fence in the middle of the Canopy Road zone, and this was after I had left. I served 3 terms or 6 years, and the committee turned them down, but they went ahead and did it anyway, and the city would not issue a notice of violation or make them move the fence. So that is another example of city management not being good leaders. So we approved probably 50% of the stuff that came across our desk because it was well thought out. We'd send it back, and the developer would come back with a revised plan. And it was rewarding to know that without us, we would have seen the degradation of the canopy roads to this day.
And those sorts of roads are hard to recover once they are degraded.
Oh, you can't. You just can't. And they need maintenance, and you've got to go out and we had Tom Jackson, who was in charge of the county, and the city was, we've had several people in charge of the city canopy roads, and they would go out and survey the roads and decide which trees were hazardous and take them out and come up with a landscaping plan. So they've been maintained until fairly recently. But as I said, with the city management not being real vigilant, we are in danger of losing more canopy. Well, this new hospital annex is necessary for FSU and for the hospital to have a joint building for medical students, university and hospital teaming up. But the location, I think, is really going to destroy Centerville Road. And again, it's the right place for the right building. And I don't think that this is an example of being judicious about the placement of the building.
And so What is the significance of the canopy roads that you found besides just, aesthetics?
They're cool. I mean, when you drive on them, they're cool. Now, they are a traffic hazard. I don't recommend them for bicyclists, but it's just nice to get away and drive the canopy and just forget about the noise and and the heat, and it's just very aesthetic.
And there's also a history connected to those roads.
Oh, yes. Yeah. There's a lot of history involved there.
The overstories of Tallahassee's 9 canopy roads are, well, storied. Miccosukee Road began as a Native American footpath, and St. Augustine Road was part of the Spanish Trail, which connected Pensacola to St. Augustine. Within Tallahassee and the surrounding areas, there are almost 80 miles of canopy roads. Shaded by stately live oaks dripping Spanish moss, it's easy to understand why they've been protected for so long. Besides our canopy roads, Ann has seen some other successes.
The one success that I mentioned before was Blairstone Road, and we have changed development's character by not allowing them to encroach upon the canopy road zone. So, I mean, there have been significant gains, but recently I don't see that as continuing.
Another successful program is the Leon County Adopt a Tree program. Have you adopted trees?
Oh, yes. If you take a look at my front yard. In fact, I noticed that my grass is no longer growing because the trees have taken over, which is okay. I don't need grass as long as I've got green in my front yard. You can take a look at them when you leave. There are several out there that Leon County planted, and it's a very successful program.
So what's involved? What do they provide you?
You call them up and say, yes, I'd like a tree, and they have somebody come out and plant it for you, and you have to water it until it gets established, and that's it, and then watch it grow.
Sounds pretty easy.
Mm-hmm.
So what types of trees have you planted?
The county has planted musclewood and what's the other tree? Similar to that. And my husband planted 2 cypress trees from the seed, and they're huge. The Adopt a Tree program is with both the city and the county. They both have them, and I urge people to contact them. It's too late now. They're not doing it this time of year, but earlier in the year, contact them, and they'll come out and plant a tree or 2, and it's very good.
And do you find that you have, a particularly unique relationship to a tree that you've sort of watered and fed and brought up?
Well, yeah, I guess the ones in my yard. But I guess I have a unique relationship with all trees.
Sure. And could you tell me more about that relationship?
Just that I want to protect them. I mean, it's just been my mission to do that. And so I did. But it's been 40 years since I started doing that. But I still get calls about tree concerns, and I still try to answer them.
Ann didn't make a career out of protecting trees, but she certainly structured her life around them. Like many who moved to Tallahassee, Ann was drawn in by its green space. I asked Ann about the move from South Florida.
It was wonderful. I came up here to go to school, and then I came back 6 years after I graduated to live here. And part of the reason was the trees and the green spaces and the parks, and it was so much different from South Florida.
I asked Ann about her favorite type of tree. Unsurprisingly, she has an appreciation for some of the arboreal life that isn't so common in more tropical environments.
Live oak. And I like Japanese maples too because of their color.
And what about live oaks is so appealing?
Well, they're so majestic. They get so huge, and their canopy is enormous. And there's a live oak at the Laura Jepson House on High Road that is absolutely fantastic. There's nothing at all like it in the rest of the county.
Well, now you're getting at my next question, which is, what is your favorite specific tree in this city?
It would have to be Laura Jepson's oak tree on High Road.
Ann took me on a brief tour to visit some of her favorite trees in her neighborhood.
Questions that you'd like help with. But you can see all these old live oaks. I mean, they're gnarly and they have Spanish moss. This road just keeps going all the way to the end. But we did have one tree come down, and you can see that it's uprooted, and that's because tree, it fell that way. You can kind of see a trail of brown patchy grass that the tree fell on.
Yeah, this.
And you can see the tree where it's cut off. And one thing that people don't realize is that tree roots only go about 3 to 4 inches beneath the surface of the ground. And so you're looking at 3 to 4 inches of grip. And that tree just got uprooted.
Even large trees can be delicate to some extent. Root systems extend far, but they mostly extend out, not down. It's easy to see how trees can be damaged by pressure on the root systems. Luckily, the trees lining most canopy roads are live oaks, a hardy species, and they've grown accustomed to the pressure of the road on their roots.
Oh, there's some good tree design.
Yeah. Now, normally you're not supposed to pave
right next to it.
Right next to them, and you're supposed to allow it out to the edge of the canopy, for protected root space.
Sure.
But not everybody does that. But these were put in. Live oaks can tolerate encroachment on tree roots more than most trees can.
Do the roots go deeper, or they're just sturdier?
They're just sturdier.
I guess they're designed to withstand pretty much anything you can throw at them.
Yeah.
The neighborhood tour Ann gave me, like her work with Tallahassee Tree Watch, harkens back to events in local history. The Live Oak Trail was a pet project of Carrie Elliott. It was created by the Community Planning Council and the Tallahassee Garden Club, 2 organizations of which Elliott was a founding member. The Live Oak Trail was a caravan tour of Tallahassee's live oak trees that occurred on June 6, 1940. It was more than just a tour. 14 families also held lunch in their homes for those in attendance. There was an additional part of the plan, a tour of the famous Avenue of Oaks at El Destino Plantation, which was never completed because the caravan got lost on the way there. Other than this, though, the trail was a massive success. It was followed with a second in the spring of 1941. Both were highly publicized and increased knowledge of the incredible live oaks of Tallahassee both within the city and throughout the state. In 2020, the Tallahassee Garden Club hosted the 3rd Live Oak Trail. The Tallahassee community nominated their favorite live oaks with a circumference of at least 6 feet, and the Garden Club created a map of them all on their website, along with a video, pictures, and lots of learning materials. Tallahassee citizens could follow a self-guided tour, social distancing friendly, remember this was 2020, peak COVID, and enjoy the oaks of Tallahassee. The tour Ann gave me of her neighborhood was much shorter than the Live Oak Trail, and luckily we didn't get lost, but there was certainly something special about getting to see some of the trees she so greatly valued in her neighborhood. The Live Oak Trail did the same thing, but on a much larger scale, with hundreds of participants touring a much larger part of the city. Ann founded Tree Watch and served on the Canopy Road Citizens Committee, but she's been involved in many other community organizations as well. She's a board member of the Tallahassee Trust for Historic Preservation, a founder of Tallahassee Arbor Day, and a member of Friends of Lake Jackson, Friends of Miccosukee Canopy Road Greenway, Friends of Tallahassee Parks and Rec, and the Florida Heritage Foundation. Ann has also contributed to and advocated for lots of other conservation work. Not everything she does relates to trees.
I've been a guest speaker at Arbor Day state conventions, but that's just I show up and talk a little bit, but no, I've never done any other tree work. Because the only place I've lived for the last 44 years is here.
While Ann hasn't done tree work, she did incorporate trees into her work as a high school English teacher.
When I was teaching the Romantic poets, I took my class out my back door into Tom Brown Park, and we did a nature walk. And on the way back from our destination, nobody could talk, and then they would come back into the classroom and write a journal entry about their experience with nature, not just trees, but just like the Romantic poets. And it was very effective. They loved getting outside and walking and coming back in and writing.
Ann has done more than most to protect trees in Tallahassee. It wasn't a job, it wasn't a requirement. Like so many people, she just cared a lot about them. Her success depended on public support. Talking to Ann has made it clear that the situation in Tallahassee has backslid, but it also reminded me that it only takes a few dedicated hard workers and a lot of ballots to make a positive institutional change. Thank you for tuning in to Tallahassee Tree Talks. Special thanks goes to my guest, Ann Bidlingmaier, and to Caroline Phillips O'Brien, whose book and extensive archival research helped me share more about the history of tree conservation in Tallahassee. Thanks goes as well to everyone involved with Tallahassee Tree Watch or anyone else involved in community efforts to preserve natural spaces in Tallahassee. Without them, our city would be far less green and far less special.